Well, you looky there. More state's evidence that says Bryan Kohberger is excluded. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. Disclaimer. Everything stated in this video is my opinion and my opinion only. And just like everything else in these cases we discuss here on this channel, everything is alleged. So we've had a lot of conversations about Bryan Kohberger's DNA in this case, and not just when it came to the knife sheath. We recently found out that fingernail clippings from Maddie Mogen were taken and that there was a mixture of DNA found in those clippings. Now, whenever the results are first read, you see that Bryan Kohberger is being labeled as inconclusive, meaning that it's not really giving you an answer because there's something there, but it's not enough to really say if it's really there. It really sort of gives it all up to interpretation, and you can't have that kind of situation in a case like this. It cannot be up to interpretation. It has to be factual. Now, what actually ended up happening with this is that it was presented to the grand jury by the state, but as evidence in favor of Bryan Kohberger, because in the end, inconclusive doesn't technically mean he was there. They claimed they did Bryan Kohberger a favor in doing so whenever his team, the defense team, wanted to try to overthrow the grand jury indictment, and the state literally came back and said that. We only mentioned that as a favor to you. Why are we going to be in trouble for something that we did to help you out? Why would you want to reverse that? Well, that's because the way that they're doing it is very, very misleading. Now, the truth is that the only reason why those results even showed up as inconclusive with the people who actually did that portion of the testing is because there's a special protocol that was created only for ISP because of an issue that ISP and ISP alone came across when it came to the ranges that they were actually testing for. This is not protocol that is followed anywhere else. It was created only for ISP. So now, because of this, again, ISP-specific protocol, the specialist from there, Riley Nowlin, is refusing to use the word excluded, even though the state now apparently has evidence from another expert from further testing that was done that actually proves Bryan Kohberger is actually excluded from the DNA mixture. Now, we actually heard during the motion hearing that just happened on the 9th of April that the defense team in the state actually used the exact same program in the end and got the exact same excluded results. The state decided to go ahead and file that for us to see. Now, all this literally states is that this is the notice of filing the supplemental affidavit in support of state's response to defendant's motion in limine number 5 regarding the inconclusive data. So again, this is being filed by the state. Once again, this is state's evidence that we are about to go through. Now, I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm not going to read his background, all of his profession, all of the stuff. We just not going to do all of that because this goes on forever, okay? Literally goes on forever. What we're going to do is start all the way down here when he starts talking about the very specific information when it comes to this case itself. And for those of you that want to go in and read up on the programs, the thresholds, all of the actual technical stuff that's in this, of course, and as always, I will have a link for this document down in the description box. But this right here, this is where we start to get into the specifics for Kohberger. Now, again, this is written by a DNA expert named Christian Westring. Opinion in regard to DNA analysis conducted by ISP Lab and Cybergenetics. The following describes my review of the DNA testing in the matter of Idaho v. Bryan C. Kohberger. As part of my analysis, I have been provided materials from the Latah District Attorney's Office, William W. Thompson Jr., Bill, relevant to this matter for my review. As part of the forensic investigation, I have been asked to address the following 3 questions. What is the definition of inclusion, exclusion, and inconclusive as it applies to forensic DNA analysis, and why do laboratories set different ranges criteria for their protocols and purposes. We're just going to go ahead and jump down to the definitions that they've included for this. Inclusion is defined as a conclusion for which an individual cannot be excluded as a potential contributor of DNA obtained from an evidentiary item based on the comparison of known and questioned DNA profiles or multiple questioned DNA profiles to each other. Exclusion, a conclusion that eliminates an individual as a potential contributor of DNA obtained from an evidentiary item based on the comparison of known and questioned DNA. Inconclusive, a determination that no conclusion can be drawn from the comparison for a reference sample to suitable data. This could also result from statistical analysis that failed to provide sufficient support for an inclusion or an exclusion. But what does it actually mean in the long run? Because does that actually mean that there is somebody's DNA there, but it's not enough to like test to verify? Or does it mean that it's like a degraded situation, so it just can't tell at all? Exclusion or non-match. When comparing a known sample to an evidence sample, the donor of the known is excluded as a source of the evidence if the profiles are different. This can either be referred to as an exclusion or a non-match. And that's what we sort of figured, but whenever they gave us the information from the grand jury, it was like they didn't know. They didn't know if it was Maddie and Kaylee and an unknown, or if it was just Maddie and two unknown. They had no clue. They had no clue. And that didn't make sense because you should have definitely been able to tell. So I guess that they just put some sort of like maybe pre-results in the grand jury information because it just felt very just not complete, at least with the portions that we did get to see. When an individual is excluded as the source of DNA, it does not necessarily mean the individual was not involved. For example, a true perpetrator who left no detectable biological material will be excluded as a source of DNA. I mean, yeah. Just like if somebody's DNA is found at the scene, it doesn't necessarily mean they are involved. Again, everything in this case is a huge catch-22. The second question that he was asked to answer is, what are the substantive differences between the analysis conducted by the ISP lab employing the STR mix software and the subsequent analysis of the ISP test results conducted by cybergenetics employing the true allele software for item 13.1? That's where we learned in the motion hearing where the defense and the state actually did end up using true allele at some point, and that's how they got the exact same results of excluded. Number 3, what is my independent opinion regarding the ISP lab DNA results for item 13.1 as it pertains to the complexity of the DNA mixture obtained and conclusion reached? Now, if you control F Kohberger on this entire document, you don't get him mentioned again for quite a while, not until you get pretty much down here. He's going into a lot of the technical things when it comes to the companies, the way that they work, the way that ISP does stuff. I know that it's important, but in order to keep this short and to the point, I don't want to go in and read all of the things that don't have actually something very, very specific to do with the case itself, which is why I always end up leaving the link for the documents down in the description box so that you guys can go and read all of the technical stuff in itself, because none of this right here actually has anything to do with the case. We actually don't get anything specific again till down here. For example, for item 13.1, the application of a single global analytical threshold of 75 RFU or relative fluorescence units for all color channels by the ISP lab resulted in the detection of 61 alleles across 22 comparable loci, excluding XY chromosome markers. At one locus, D18S51, 6 unique alleles were detected based on maximum allele count alone. This would be consistent with a mixture of at least 3 contributors. This person agrees with this conclusion. The next one says that a similar analysis by cybergenetics employing true allele and a global analytical threshold of 1 RFU with a peak height cutoff of 15 resulted in the detection of approximately 140 potential alleles across 22 comparable loci, excluding the same XY chromosome markers. three loci, D1S1656, D18S51, and D21S11, were consistent with a mixture of at least three individuals, and one locus, D18S51, was consistent with a mixture of at least four individuals. With consideration to victims, reference genotypes at D18S51, this is consistent with a mixture of at least four contributors. With the application of a lower AT, I agree with this conclusion based on the inferred genotypes reported. The mixture is consistent with a mixture of four contributors. So this one up here, and the way they figured it out, says 3, and he says, yeah, I agree with that, with this being done at 75 RFU. But then this one's done at 1 with a peak of 15 and comes up with a 4-person contributor mixture. And he says, well, with the way that they figured this one out, I agree with it too. That's interesting. Comparing the results obtained from the interpretation of the DNA profile developed by the ISP lab for item 13.1 to the analysis conducted by cybergenetics, the differences in interpretation may be attributed to the following factors: the analytical threshold, ISP peak amplitude threshold versus cybergenetics peak height cutoff of 75 RFU versus 15 RFU for the interpretation of allelic data. Yeah, that's kind of the first thing that I noticed. Potential differences in the application of forward and reverse stutter parameters, example, those obtained by ISP Lab through internal validation versus those published for the ProMega PowerPlex fusion system versus a probability-based model. The method employed for estimating number of contributors, maximum allele count at D18S51, versus potential mixture deconvolution employing expected contributors, example, victims' relative contributions to the major and mid-level alleles at D18S51. Potential differences in the estimated proportion of victims' DNA as a major and/or secondary contributor, particularly at locus D18S51, the remaining alleles in the mixture. These factors and potentially others, either individually or collectively, may amount for different opinions regarding 1, the potential number of contributors to the mixture observed from item 13.1, and 2, reporting the mathematical weight of the evidence expressed as a likelihood ratio calculated by both the ISP lab and cybergenetics respectively. Reporting the LR, the likelihood ratio, 0.0469 by ISP as inconclusive falls within their validated inconclusive range. Theirs. Again, created only for ISP. And is in accordance with the ISP lab protocols. Again, only for the ISP lab. Ultimately, both results, when considering the guidance from SWG-DAM for reporting likelihood ratios, provide support for the proposition that Bryan Kohberger is not a contributor to the mixed DNA profile obtained from item 13.1, albeit with different mathematical weights. My findings here are based upon my analysis and interpretation of the ISP laboratory DNA test results employing the ProMega PowerPlex fusion system, employing the Osiris analysis software for item 13.1, sample from body of Madison Mogen. Item 11, reference sample from Madison Mogen. Item 14, reference sample from Kaylee Goncalves. And item 108, reference sample from Bryan Kohberger, are described below. Additional items were tested by the ISP lab, but not reviewed or discussed herein. The ISP lab's DNA quantitation results for the DNA extract generated from item 13.1 were reviewed and analyzed to assess the total yield of human and male DNA. DNA quantitation data provide a useful guide when assessing DNA mixtures that may contain disproportionate quantities of female and male DNA. The following results were observed. Autosomal quantity 0.0506. Y chromosome quantity 0.007. Sample 13.1 contains approximately 1.3% male DNA. That's it. Out of the mixture itself, only 1.3% of it is actually male. Not even enough to honestly count. We can't even pretend like it's enough to matter if we are going to fight the fight about the DNA on the knife sheath. Considering the fact that the rest of that percentage is Maddie and Kaylee, this isn't really enough at all. Like, she basically could have accidentally shook someone's hand who shook that guy's hand earlier in the night. It literally could mean nothing. Based on the DNA quantitation results observed, the ISP lab subsequently performed a dilution of the DNA extract generated from item 13.1, and the interpretation of those results say that employing the validated color-specific thresholds resulted in the detection of a full DNA profile, consistent with a mixture of at least 4 contributors, at least one of whom is male. The following comparisons were made. Madison Mogen cannot be excluded as a potential contributor. Kaylee Goncalves cannot be excluded as a potential contributor. Bryan Kohberger was excluded as a potential contributor to the DNA profile. Now, when it comes to Maddie and Kaylee not being excluded, there's 2 footnotes, and it states that given the nature of the evidence, a match statistic was not calculated, but can be if requested, meaning they were found together. This doesn't shock anything. It doesn't mean anything. It would be honestly a lot more strange if that wasn't the case. Based on the initial qualitative assessment of the DNA profiles obtained from item 13.1, the known reference DNA profiles for Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves were used to estimate the relative mixture proportions observed, and it calculates as follows. Madison Mogen, 83%. It was her own DNA mixture. Makes sense. Kaylee Goncalves, 12%. Unknown contributors, 5. Again, not a lot. Literally not a lot at all. Now, in this 5%, it has 1% being unknown male or males, because notice it has a parenthesis S right there. And then it has approximately 1% of the DNA in the sample is from a male origin. So again, it's not really a lot. It's not really a lot to really say anything about, honestly. It's not. We can't, again, argue that that's enough when that's just as much, really, as it comes to what's going on with the knife sheath stuff. Let's be so serious. But it's also interesting to me that they can't really choose between 3 and 4, or if it is more than one unknown male, but I guess that's because it's just really not enough to be able to tell. Because it says this quantity of DNA is consistent with 3 to 4 diploid male cells. The number of minor male contributors cannot be determined based on lack of results at DYS391. Yeah, they can't tell. Based on the interpretations of the mixed DNA profile observed from item 13.1, including the results observed at locus D18, S51, and others, Bryan Kohberger was excluded as a potential contributor to the mixed DNA profile. These results are consistent with the findings reported by Cybergenetics Group when employing the True Allele software. As part of my analysis, I employed the LR Mixed Studio software for calculating likelihood ratios. A match between item 13.1, the body sample from Madison Mogen and Bryan Kohberger, is 5,000 times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated African American person, 68,000 times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated Caucasian person, and 101,000 times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated Hispanic person. In summary, it is my professional opinion that the discovery materials provided by the Idaho State Police Forensic Laboratory and the Cybergenetics Group were appropriate for this type of review. The definitions provided for included, excluded, and inconclusive are based on generally accepted sources in the field of forensic science. The ISP laboratory internal validation studies should have been incorporated into the analysis performed by Cybergenetics. Such studies may help bridge the gap in LRs between STR mix and true allele in this case. In the absence of such studies, a direct comparison between these two figures is not meaningful and merely reflects the difference between two systems employing different analytical approaches. I agree with assessment from Cybergenetics regarding the number of contributors to item 13.1. The DNA mixture obtained from item 13.1 is consistent with a mixture of at least 4 individuals, at least one whom is male. Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves cannot be excluded as potential contributors to the mixture. Based on the quantitative testing conducted by the ISP laboratory, approximately 1% of the total DNA yield in item 13.1 is male DNA. These results are further supported by the STR results at several loci. The male DNA component analyzed on consistent with approximately 3 to 4 cells. The ISP laboratory concluded that the analysis was inconclusive with regards to Bryan Kohberger in accordance with their published SOPs. A policy to apply an LR threshold on 0.01 to 100 is balanced and neither favors one side or the other. Considering the SWG-DAM scale of verbal qualifiers for reporting likelihood ratios, the reciprocal of the LR of 0.046 calculated by ISP provides limited support for the defense proposition. This reflects the probability of the DNA evidence being 25 times likely if the DNA originated from an unknown, unrelated individual than if it originated from Bryan Kohberger. Based on my independent analysis of the data generated by the ISP lab, Bryan Kohberger was excluded as potential contributor to the mixed DNA sample obtained from the body swab collected from Maddie Mogen. Now it says "and" like a name, but I'm pretty sure it just means "and" as in an LR was calculated. It's just a typo, which there's another typo in Bryan's name in the next sentence too. I guess this person was in a rush at the end of this, which is, again, what they've said from the beginning, which is the reason why they claim they actually put it in there for the grand jury so they could actually put something in there in Bryan's favor along with everything else, which is just odd in itself, but also like why? If it doesn't even go with what you're trying to do here, what's the point besides trying to make it confusing because of all the inconclusive language that was used? It was very well played, I shall say. Now that's it in way of an actual document that we can go in and read. Now, what we did have actually happen is something else filed for the AT&T timing advance records. Now, in the hearing, Judge Hippler came out and said out of his face on court record that what Cyree was claiming was a conspiracy theory. So I don't know if this is going to be some sort of emotional response written by Cyree because of what this dude just said about him. He was sitting there, listening in on Zoom, ready and willing, just in case he was going to be called in to answer a question. And he heard him saying all of this about him and could not even jump in to answer things, defend himself, or fill in the blanks for whatever the judge felt that he was having issues with. The entire thing was highly unprofessional for a judge that claims that he doesn't want any theatrics in the courtroom. So we have that's been filed, but again, it says that it's sealed, so I don't know how much of that we're going to be able to see. What I noticed on Friday night whenever we went live is that something else was also filed, something that is titled "The Defendant's Response to State's First Supplemental Request for Discovery Regarding Transfer of Test Materials." Well, considering that it's been an entire day since I recorded this, I went ahead and checked the Idaho case of interest site, and it turns out that we do have the document for the transfer of test materials. So it says, "Comes now Bryan C. Kohberger by and through his attorneys of record, and hereby submits their response to the state's first supplemental request for discovery as required by Idaho Criminal Rule 16. Mr. Kohberger first responds that he has complied with discovery request for experts as provided in the Idaho criminal rules. This specific request for additional materials related to ICR 16C came for the first time on April 2nd of 2025, so just 12 days ago, less than 2 weeks. Mr. Kohberger responds specifically to Part 2.1 of the state's request. Upon agreement from the Latell County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, the requested test materials will be provided between doctors directly. Dr. Orr will provide testing data to the state's expert blank, who is a licensed psychologist. This method of disclosure is in compliance with the APA Ethics Code Standard 9.04 and 9.11. Dr. Orr must adhere to these ethical standards in releasing test materials, including protocols, test items, etc. Dr. Orr will work directly with blank to transfer the requested materials once contact information has been exchanged." So it's going to be psych evaluation information going from doctor to doctor. I wonder who this is and why we have a redacted name. I guess some people are wanting to be kept private. I can understand that. But for now, let me know what you guys are thinking about all of this down in the comments. If you like the way that I present this information and give my opinion, please don't forget to leave a like on the way out. Subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already. And please don't forget to make sure that that notification bell is set to all so you don't miss any of my rants, reviews, reactions, updates, or deep dives. See y'all.